All right, welcome back to the channel. You know me, Chris Vanderkay, found footage fanatic, filmmaker, curator, entrepreneur. Who knows what else I am? I am lucky enough to have someone on today who was a bit of an inspiration for me to make my film, and also I think has been an inspiration for many other filmmakers in the found footage space. Dillon Brown. Dillon, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to be here.
So before we dive into talking about the specifics of today, which is going to be, we talk about the Tahoe Joe trilogy. I wanted to get, could you give us just a quick synopsis for those very rare people that somehow stumbled onto this interview and have not seen one of those films? Could you just give us like a 1,000-foot view of how you pitched the Tahoe Joe to someone who hasn't seen it?
Yeah, so it's basically the Sierra Nevadas Bigfoot story that we've kind of created in our own way. There's always been talks of Bigfoot over here, but Mike Rock and I wanted to make our own sort of spin on it, and it's shot like a faux documentary. It's a series of 3 films that essentially tells our story, tracking this creature, this elusive creature through the wilderness, and there's some missing persons cases, there's conspiracy, there's a lot of fun stuff. It's hard to talk about without giving spoilers. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, so that's interesting to me, the idea, because Bigfoot is not primarily known for appearing in the area, or at least not that's not the legend of his normal stomping grounds. So I am curious because is the area that you shot in, is that a place that you grew up? Have you lived there for most of your life?
yeah. So I am based out of Reno, Nevada, and I think a lot of people associate Reno with Vegas. They think like desert southern part. We're actually way up north, and Reno is very close to California. So we have a lot of the Sierra Nevada mountain range on one side of the highway. The other side of the highway is your Dutch marriage horror in the high desert territory. So it's interesting because we have both of these ecosystems that kind of clash. And the Sierra Nevada side, where Lake Tahoe is, it's just full of black bear sightings, and wolves are starting to come in now. People are coming from all over the world to camp there, and I just thought somebody at some point has got to have a strange encounter that was up there. And you're right. The Bigfoot stuff is more north of us. It seems like more up in Oregon, Washington. But as I was poking around, there are some people locally that actually do believe, really, I mean, you can't even question them. They believe they have had a Bigfoot encounter up around this area. So even as a small child, I had kind of heard stories, even though nobody close to me, ever had an encounter, or myself, I never had one. But it just seemed like the right story to try and tell because, like you said, nobody's really tackled it in this specific region.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a perfect segue. You mentioned you'd heard from when you were younger, you'd heard legends about that. I'm curious if we just expanded out to the conversation of Bigfoot in general, not specific to the ones in your area. How did Bigfoot first enter your awareness? Do you think, was it first like hearing about it from real world legends and myth, or was it some movie or TV show or something like that? Like for me, it was the 2-part $6 Million Man episode that like sort of popularized it for everybody, and that was kind of where it came into my perspective. But I'm just curious, was it the real world legends or was it TV and film that brought it into your awareness?
It was definitely film. It was Harry and the Hendersons. I watched a recorded off television version of that movie on VHS that my aunt had at her house 1,000 times. We would go stay there in the summers. And it was just right where I was born. But I was really close with my aunt. My mom worked all day, and so then she would drop me at my aunt's house for almost, like babysitting. And we would watch Harry and the Hendersons, my sister and I, all the time. And I was just so obsessed with. I loved the creature design, and then Harry was such like this endearing creature, and he had this personality. And it wasn't until, oh gosh, probably 4 or 5 years after I had seen Harry and the Hendersons that my cousin had said, "Hey, do you want to see Harry's distant cousin?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he put on some snippets of The Legend of Boggy Creek, and it horrified me. He told me it was real and that they were out there and this thing was violent and scary, and I was suddenly like, never mind, these things are not cute, they're not cuddly, they're not fun, and it was terrifying. So for me, it started off very sweet and then it got very scary.
Oh, that's interesting because I was going to ask you one of the things about that because you've made 3 films about Bigfoot, and I find there's an interesting juxtaposition with a lot of filmmakers where there's this close proximity with fear and fascination, right? Where they're repelled by something, but they're also drawn to it at the same time. So I was curious, it sounds like maybe you've answered this a bit, but does Bigfoot scare you or does he fascinate you as an adult? I know as a child you made that clear.
Yeah, so it's just I think the idea of it is fascinating at this point. Now, I will open up and just say this, and I break hearts all the time. Mike's the same way. We always say this. Neither of us are actual Bigfoot believers. You're not going to see me out on a Bigfoot expedition. I don't watch shows on Discovery about it all the time, purely because I just have my own thoughts on being an outdoorsman myself and the countless hours I've been out there, the amount of cameras everywhere, human encroachment, not finding dead bodies. It's just like at some point I know we would have some tangible evidence if I was to truly believe. But the the kid in me and the filmmaker in me says it's a much more realistic monster to play around with than say like a Area 51 experiment that escapes, or some sort of body horror thing, or dinosaurs coming back from through a wormhole. I mean, I love those movies and I love premises that go crazy like that because I'm a monster movie fanatic. But something about the Bigfoot legend feels like you can do a monster movie, but it can still have this sense of realism. And that's why when we did the first Tahoe Joe, and obviously they've shifted tonally as we've moved on, but that first one, Mike and I really did try and make it as close to like real world as we could. So we were interjecting stuff that was happening in our real lives, and all these real locations. And I think because Bigfoot just feels like a semi plausible organism that could exist, it's easier to navigate that.
Yeah. Well, I also think there's some element of, I don't know if it's wish fulfillment exactly, but I think we like the idea that in a world we live in where everybody's ultra connected and there's no way to get away from it all, we like the idea that there's something out there we haven't discovered that has dodged the cameras and dodged human experience in some way, and that the world still has something to show us that we haven't seen yet. So I do think that is part of what draws us back to it too.
Absolutely. It's just like what's the one thing that seems like people are always scared of, and it's the unexplained. If you can't put a definition on something, or you can't fully explain it, it seems like people start to formulate their own fears. And so yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a part of me that says no, I don't believe in Bigfoot, but there's a little part of me somewhere that says I hope one day I am proven wrong, because it would be so cool.
Right. As Mulder says, I want to believe. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I want to
Yep.
believe.
Yeah. For sure. Well, so this all three of the films were shot in found footage style. They were not the first found footage films you made. You made some before that that are found footage or fake documentary style. I'm curious. Everybody usually tells their origin story as a filmmaker when they knew they wanted to be a filmmaker, but I like to dig in a little deeper because I like to cover a lot of found footage stuff. How did you become interested specifically in found footage filmmaking? When did the love or interest, fascination for that come about?
It was 2020. So I had done some filmmaking stuff with some buddies, very traditional style, way back. Oh my gosh, probably starting around 2008 or nine, when we were all out of. Oh, I graduated high school in 2004, and then some friends of mine went to do some film stuff in school. I went a different route. I wanted to be a writer, so I went to school for English. But then we, of course, joined forces when they said, "Hey, I don't write, you write. I make films. Let's come together." So we did some stuff, and I had so much fun seeing stories come to life in front of the camera, and I got really fascinated with that. But life happened, right? I not quite sure where I wanted to go with a career, and I didn't know where I was going to really end up, maybe living wise. And then I ended up meeting my wife, and we wanted to start a family. And so I had this desire to be a filmmaker, but I kept thinking, what's the realistic outcome of that, right? Like, do I pour a bunch into this and then it never goes anywhere, or it's unsuccessful, and then do I fall out of love with it? It was the pandemic, and I worked for the military. So at the time, the military base had no idea what to do with anybody. They were like, "We don't want a super spreader event with 1,700 people out here." We had COVID kits that we were actually shipping all over the country out at our base. So of course they needed to keep the workforce as healthy as possible.
Yep.
And so anybody that may have been somewhat exposed was just sent home for like a month. They just forced you to stay home on administrative leave for like a month. And of course, I end up being like patient zero, right? I'm like the first person on the base that has an exposure to something. My father-in-law was sick and we didn't know if he had it. The base is just like, Dillon, you're staying home for like 4 weeks and we'll pay you. And so I'm at home and I'm like, what do I do with myself right now? So I was writing a lot. And for some reason, and I still cannot tell you exactly why, I just got up one day and I was like, I'm going to go take a hike out in the desert and I want to make a short film. I'm just going to do it. And I thought the only way I'm going to be able to do this is if I just pretend like it's really happening to me and I just do like I narrate. And so what I did was I went out behind my apartment complex and I made a Tremors fan film because I thought I live in Nevada. I have the desert here. It's perfect, right? And so I shot it with my phone and it was hilarious. And I had these little funny little after effects and made a graboid and I had all this stuff and I shot it in about a day. Uh, and just for fun, I threw it on Twitter and Facebook and I was just having fun. Uh, and all of a sudden, Bloody Disgusting says, we want to do an article on this pandemic filmmaking thing. And this is great, this amazing Tremors fan film. So they posted it on their website. And I go from like, 100 views on the thing to like 20,000 views overnight. And I'm like, whoa, this is so cool. And there was all these really sweet comments and people saying, that they enjoyed it. And I thought, wait a minute. If you're going to do a movie, this is the style you're in control of. You don't need a whole huge crew for it, and you don't need the budget for it. So I just started devouring found footage movies, and I just started watching everything I could find, the good, the bad, stuff I had never heard of. And as I was watching, it's like every film I watched, I went, oh yeah, I could do this. Oh yeah, I could do this. And then some of them were blowing me away where I'm like, yeah, I can't touch that. Like I watched Jerusalem, and I was like, that's a lot of budget there. But I just kept seeing so many creative things that creators were doing to fake special effects or to make you scared, and that was just putting you in the eyes of the person with the camera and not letting the viewer escape. I always like I love terrifying movies, but like I always think back to The Silence of the Lambs. The scariest part in that movie for me is when you're seeing the POV of Buffalo Bill with the night vision goggles on and his hands reaching out. And what was so scary to me is I didn't want to be in that POV, but the filmmaker was forcing me to be there. I was forced into that. And found footage is the entire movie is forcing you to be in a situation you don't want to be in. So I was just drawn to that. And I think for me, it was this is a very reachable goal. I could make a movie in this style. I've had every excuse not to do it the other way. There's no reason to not do it this way. And so I just went for it, man. I just went for it.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Silence of the Lambs because even in the sequences where you're not seeing through the night vision goggles, Jonathan Demme made a very specific choice in that film that all the back and forth shots are straight to camera, characters
Yes.
looking into the camera. And even those sequences create a sense of eeriness for the audience because you're now being engaged in the narrative because Clarice and Hannibal are both looking you in the eyes when they're talking. And I agree with you. Even I had seen some found footage before I saw that movie in the 90s, but I didn't realize what it was. But how that movie affected me is similar to how found footage films affect you because the characters are referencing the camera and therefore pulling you into the story.
Yeah, I was always a huge fan of Saved by the Bell. That was like my favorite show growing up as a kid. And the moments when Zach Morris would break the fourth wall and talk to the audience to have some kind of plot armor or to move something forward for like comedic element, it just worked so well for me because I was such a fan of the show. I wanted these people to be my friends when I was a kid. And then I felt like there was this moment every episode that he would speak to me like I was part of the crew. And I think that's what's so fun about found footage movies is you do feel like you are part of the crew. But then that also can be such a downer if you're in a found footage movie or you're watching a found footage movie with like the worst characters imaginable because then you're like, I want them all to die, please.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because then it's not that you're journeying with them; it's that you're stuck with them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the idea of Tahoe Joe. That was how you got into found footage filmmaking. But this was what your second or third found footage film? Tahoe Joe was
It was my third.
third. Yeah. So what was the moment that brought Tahoe Joe as a concept into the world? Like the kernel of the idea, the inspiration, the lightning strike. Where did that come from?
All credit has to go to Eduardo Sanchez with Exists. I was just flipping through films at one point, and I don't even really remember like specifically saying I wanted to watch a Bigfoot movie or something. But I saw it, the trailer came up, and I was like, oh, cool. I was like, it's Blair Witch with a Bigfoot. You know, it's kind of what the trailer was selling me on. So I put it on, and like, honestly, I remember not really paying a whole lot of attention. I was doing like a bunch of other stuff. But then the sequence with the RV flipping over and Bigfoot like jumping on it and all this stuff was going on, and I was like locked in, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I rewound it back and I watched the movie, and I was like, damn, found footage is not just running around in the woods and never seeing anything. Like, this guy went for this. This is amazing. And so it kind of led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole with Bigfoot movies, and I started to find, I was trying to look for lists of like good Bigfoot movies, because I've learned that for every good Bigfoot movie, there's like 40 awful Bigfoot movies. And I found a Facebook group called the Bigfoot Film Circle Association, and they are curators of every Bigfoot movie ever made, and they rank them and they talk about them, and these people are obsessed with Bigfoot movies. And so I was like, well, who better to go to look at a list of movies than the Bigfoot Film Circle Association, right? And they've got like a cool logo, and they're this tight knit group. And I saw Primal. I think, what's it called? Is it just called Primal or something? It's like Bigfoot wears like armor that he's crafted out of wood. Um, and that one was amazing. It had this like beautiful Bigfoot animatronic done by Patrick McGee from McGee Studios. Is so cool. The story behind the movie was amazing. Like, one of the actors lost his leg while they were actually filming, and they had to go back like a year later and finish it. Um, and I saw that one. I ended up rewatching Boggy Creek, and that was where it was the Boggy Creek thing, and then kind of with Existo, where I was like, if I'm gonna do this, because at this point I'm like, I would love to do a Bigfoot thing. How fun would that be? But it was at that moment where I was like, if I'm gonna do it, it has to be in this style. It has to be like a fake documentary or found footage, because that's the only way I can really, really be in control of not showing him very much, but immersing the viewer like in the woods. And so I talked to Mike Rock. We were actually at the premiere of another movie that I had done, the first movie I ever did with Mike, called The Flock. And I was like, hey, I have this idea. So if you had fun doing this project with me, and you want to work together again, I have another idea if you want to meet. So we ended up meeting, a little while later, and I kind of hashed out this idea to him. And at first Mike was just like, I could see it in his face. He's just like, bro, like, Bigfoot on a budget, like, um, so I shot the first like 5 minutes of the movie that it was just me talking to the camera and doing some B-roll stuff, and sort of showing him the style I was going for. And when Mike saw that I was making it look like a real documentary and that I was playing myself, he was in. He was like 1,000% in. And so I would say that, yeah, it was really just, it was other films doing it well that probably aided me to have the guts to go for it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. There's two movies you brought up, Exists and Harry and the Hendersons, which most people would say, aside from Bigfoot itself, they don't have a whole lot in common. But I think there is one element that I think is interesting about them in addition to having Bigfoot, which, and I'm not sure if this is what made you connect with both of them, is that there are hidden depths of character in both of the Bigfoot characters in those movies. The Sasquatches have a background, they have relationships, they have an inner life, and the way that they interact with characters is based on stuff we don't see on screen, but we have to intuit based on their behavior. And I think that's really interesting. And also, it required of them to have really good practical makeup effects, especially Harry and the Hendersons, because of how much he interacted. So
Yeah.
much work was done with the face. But the same is true even of Exists, the final sequence where you really start to understand what the motivation of the Sasquatch is. And there's a very, very tense but also strangely moving confrontation between one of the final characters and the Bigfoot. And so that started me thinking with the idea about how big an undertaking this movie is, like you were saying, for indie found footage filmmaking, particularly the practical monster effect. What made you confident that you haven't done much in the way of practical monsters before you made Tahoe Joe? Like, what gave you the confidence that you were just like, yeah, I can pull that off?
Probably blissful ignorance and a little bit of a cocky attitude. um, no, and so I think for me, what it was I kept thinking, and I've mentioned this before to a few people, but I still don't think that it's like widely known yet. Um, but Jaws is basically the skeleton of Tahoe Joe, right? So I'm like the biggest Jaws fan ever. I love that movie so much. And so when you watch the first Tahoe Joe, I actually modeled almost the whole movie after Jaws, even down to the character of Shane, who's like our guide out into the woods, being the Quint. He's got long sideburns and everything, and he's very much modeled after Quint. He's drinking on the job, and he's wild and unruly. Mike having a law enforcement background, being my Sheriff Brody, you know, and then me kind of being the hooper of the whole thing, the documentarian. And so for me, I kept thinking, well, we're not going to really show Bigfoot outside of some dark nighttime stuff, or I'm going to grain the footage up so much that you're not going to really be able to tell. So I had that in my head. And then when it came down to like, okay, now I need to get something to craft a Bigfoot suit, I was like, shit, dude, like it's so easy to say I'm going to do this, but now I actually have to do it. Um, so I'm looking at like secondhand Chewbacca costumes. I'm online and I'm looking at like stuff, but it's so some of the stuff is just absurdly expensive and I did not have the budget for it. So I got an old ghillie suit and I painted the hell out of it and I rolled it in the mud and the dirt to make the look all matted up. And I took an old Planet of the Apes latex mask and I cut the mouth part of it open, bought some sharp teeth and hot glued them in there, repainted the mask a little bit, and bought some monster gloves on Etsy, and voila, we had a Bigfoot. And it looked comically bad in the light. I mean, just like to the point where I'm like, if anybody sees this, they're going to go, you are making a bad Bigfoot movie. That's what you're doing. And I wanted to fight against that so bad. So, like, I wasn't showing any behind the scenes stuff with that thing. I didn't want anybody to see what it looked like. Mike and I had some ideas to have more scenes with that thing until we saw it out in the woods and we're just like, oh my God, this is so bad. So it basically turned into, if we're going to show him, we're going to do it at night. And then I sort of discovered that a lot of found footage movies were famous for switching to night shot, where you get the green overlay. And it hid so many things, and I was able to make it grainy, and it felt like it belonged because it felt like an older video camera trying to process low light, situations. And it was like, boom, there we go. There's my fix. And so I still, even with that, I think in the first Tahoe Joe movie, the costume maybe has like, I'm not even kidding, like 18 seconds of like actual screen time in the entire movie, but it's just all you needed to see, right? It was just enough to know that something was out there, and that was my inspiration from what Spielberg did with Jaws, knowing that the shark feels like it's in the movie for so much, but I think it has like 8 minutes of screen time in like a 2 hour movie, if even that, you know. So I think that's where kind of maybe some of the original confidence turned into more tactical approach. I can do this because I know how to manipulate this enough to pull it off.
So there's another thing I'm curious about, which is because there's a lot of practical things that need to be handled. There's the special effects. You guys are in the woods, multiple cameras, multiple characters. So there's a lot to juggle. I'm curious, what was the writing process like in the sense of, did you guys have a solidified script, or did you have sort of more like a beat sheet of the events you knew were going to happen and you worked from that improvisationally? I know you've worked with Mike before, so I don't know. You guys had a very good rapport, sort of like an easy chemistry on camera. So I was curious, is that something that you had to work over in the writing process, or was that something that you sort of found in the moments?
Yeah, it's funny. The original Tahoe Joe was like fully written out. Like I had this idea forever, but the minute I was going to do it as a fake documentary, I just threw it out the window because I was like, I'm not going to be in control of everything that happens when we try to lock in a location. Maybe the area that I would like to shoot in, I can't because it's Tahoe National Forest. They might say you're not allowed in here. So I started realizing I'm going to have to be really, really fluid with everything. So I just kind of, like you said, I had some bullet points, like a beat sheet of what I needed. But this sounds insane, but it worked because I was with the right people. Mike and Shane, who are my two co-stars in it, thankfully them being friends before and actual like coworkers in a sense, and then me being friends with Mike and just kind of genuinely, I like to be around people, so I always try to just be easy to get along with as much as I can. So even though that was like the first time I ever worked with Shane, we did find it very easy to kind of start riffing off of each other, and we were picking up on each other's cues and stuff. And so the second half of Tahoe Joe, once we get into the woods, all of that was done in a single afternoon and into the night. It was all done, and it was done in real time, essentially. I was editing it as we were making it in the field. Reason being was we didn't have anything written out at that point. So we were just letting things happen and just like, let's just walk as far as we want to go until we find a cool spot. Let's just go. So even I didn't know where we were going to end up. We didn't really know we were going to go from like one spot to the next. It was just, let's just go make this movie and see what happens, which was also really fun when Mike just randomly in the middle of the night was like, hey, we're going to split up at this point. And he just like takes off. And then I'm out there running around with the camera, but not really sure of where I was. A bit panicky, which was great for the acting side. But yeah, we were basically putting that movie together as we were shooting it, and then we would just take the stuff that we liked, and then we'd go, okay, we'd re-watch it, and we'd say, okay, Shane just said this, this, and this, and there was this conflict. So let's take that plot point that we've kind of hit and let's expand on that. And then we would look at another clip and we go, I don't like what you said in that one because that might put us into a corner, with the story. So let's axe that one and we'll go with this route instead. So we were just letting it go, and we were letting the woods kind of become a character in the movie, to where whatever the woods were providing and we saw something cool, we would be like, let's shoot there. And they definitely became a character, because running around at night in the woods was terrifying. I was like getting hit by trees that I could have sworn were not there when I was there in the daylight. Now they were there in the dark. A lot of sounds. We were spooking deer and stuff out of there. So when you're making a scary movie and you're getting wildlife running around, it's incredible. Free sound effects, and it was a blast.
Well, so you touched on a couple of things that I love about found footage, one earlier and one just now. The one you just mentioned was the highly improvisational nature of found footage filmmaking, that it allows you to find story elements in real time in a way that regular films just simply don't. You just can't do it. There's too many people involved, there's too much scheduling involved for you to be able to sort of be free. And also the speed with which you can shoot. Like you were saying, the last half of the movie was shot, in the better part of a day.
Yeah.
But another thing that I really love about found footage, and I don't think found footage gets enough credit, I would say, in sort of the wider world, which is that so many movies become generic enough to be able to play everywhere that they lose their regional specificity and the things that make it distinct culturally and geographically and things like that. And it feels to me like found footage has allowed that to get back into not necessarily the mainstream, at least, but through places like Tubi and Amazon Prime, where you can go watch these movies, for regional filmmakers to reach the whole world with a story that is specifically located in a place in a way that it hasn't really been in mainstream film for a long time. I'm curious if there's something about found footage, now that you've worked in it for several entries, is there something that you wish that found footage fans or filmmakers knew about found footage filmmaking or films or movies, like something you think they don't know or realize or understand or appreciate that you really love?
I think there is this like weird stigma that if it's a found footage movie, it's just automatically going to be terrible, or this is amateur garbage. And it's like I've noticed that you have all these tiers of like movie fans, right? You have your people who just enjoy movies, more of your casual film goer, but they're kind of limited by giant names. And if I've seen a movie with Tom Cruise in it, then I'll go see this next Tom Cruise movie. Or it's playing in theaters, it must be amazing, but they kind of stop there. Then you'll have your horror fans that are like used to stuff probably not going to theaters, and then finding all these amazing hidden gems, and they're willing to kind of reach into that indie world and look at stuff. And then you have like this subgenre of the horror fans that are like, what's this unknown? Where's the stuff that you're not going to see everywhere? I want to seek out that kind of stuff. But I still feel like found footage, even in all those groups, is still kind of always like the little brother that's trying to like be known in those areas. And what I always like to tell people is, yes, it's maybe got that reputation, but it's incredibly hard to film when you want to pull off special effects, because you don't have the multiple camera angles. You don't have like this omniscient point of view to hide effects and to say, well, I need the shot to be this so I can position the camera this way to make sure I get it. You'd have to explain why the camera is doing what it's doing the entire movie. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And so to me, anybody that says making it is easy has clearly never done it, because the moment you want to pull off an in-camera effect, there is an unbelievable amount of thought and experimenting. Choreography, that's the word I was looking for, to make it work. Like your characters are going to have to move a certain way and set the camera down, or the camera's going to have to be positioned in a certain way to pull this effect off, because you don't always get to hide the hoses that are spraying the fake blood, or the wires that are holding something, or the creature effects that are a puppet. And so it's just like, I see people in a lot of these groups and they'll talk about, like, oh, anybody can just pick up a camera. And I'm like, yes, they can. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be catastrophic. And it is very, very hard to do in-camera effects in found footage movies. So I applaud all of them. When I see a really good effect in a found footage movie, I'm like, damn, that was cool. That was
Yeah.
great. Like, how did they do that?
Yeah. Well, in that way, it's similar to live theater because you can't
Yes.
hide things behind anything in live theater in the same way that you can't with found footage. Because, like you said, sometimes you can cut if you have a second or third camera running, but by and large, you still have to explain why are you shooting from that angle? Why did you cut at that exact point? Why is the light suddenly darker in this moment than it was in that one to cover up? So, yeah, there's a multitude of sins you can hide in a narrative film that you can't hide in these. And so, you're right, that absolutely is a massive challenge, and one that I think largely that you met as you continued through the series, which, speaking of which, reminds me, I have to imagine that so let's talk about making a trilogy of films without a map. I assume that you made the first one without intending that this was going to become a trilogy of films, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And so, did the second one come about simply because of the popularity of the first, and you decided, well, there's more story here? Or what was the impetus, first of all, about doing a sequel? And second of all, were you aware once you started down that road that it was going to become a trilogy of films? Like, did you have a sense of like beginning, middle, end chapters for a story?
I'm I'm glad you brought that up, because this is like, it's so interesting, right? It's all this is probably not what anybody would expect to hear. Partly, yes, we did the sequel because a lot of people were asking for another one. I did have a lot of people who loved the first Tahoe Joe that were asking, what was up with that ending? Because we left the first Tahoe Joe ending to be very kind of ambiguous. And really, we did it because we just thought it was a cool, weird ending and it was fun. And we were playing with this conspiracy angle. But I wasn't doing it because I had more story to tell. I was just doing it because I thought this is a fun way to not end the movie how everybody's expecting it to end. But people kept asking. They wanted to know what it was. They wanted to know more about it. So the second movie, it's almost it's funny. Mike and I had what we call our couch sessions. I have a couch in my editing studio where we just sit on the couch. We throw on a movie that we usually don't pay attention to, and then we just start talking about what we're going to do next. And we were in here chatting about, if we were to do a Tahoe Joe 2, what would we do? And we had this idea where we're like, what if we kind of troll the audience? And if we do a sequel, it's going to be that crappy Bigfoot suit that all of our haters had to make sure that we knew about. They had to tell us every time they wrote something on Facebook, like, oh, your Bigfoot looks like shit. We were like, what if that wasn't actually Tahoe Joe, and it was people in these suits that were like running people off the mountain to hide something up there, or the real Tahoe Joe or something? So that's where it kind of went. And we're like, yeah, this would be great, because we could kind of take what they're doing, or what they're saying, their criticisms, to heart, and come up with a better Bigfoot suit. But we can also have fun with it, and sort of act like that was the plan the whole time. And so that's really, it was that twist is where we decided to take the sequel and just let it go from there. And by that point we had raised more money. We had some people that wanted to get involved, to donate some money. So then we were able to put together a better costume. And I went to Immortal Masks in Los Angeles and talked to the guys there, and they had this really, really cool Yeti sculpt, but I didn't want it to be like a white Yeti figure, so I had him custom paint it to be more of like a Bigfoot thing, and that kind of helped us craft our new Joe, our new and improved suit. But I will tell you that once we finished the second one, I felt like this was fun, this was cool. We got to go do the Bigfoot thing. We did it in the snow, which was really fun to go do the snow thing. But then I was like, I don't want to do snow anymore. Like, it's cold, it sucks, the actors are cold and miserable. So Mike and I were just like, cool, we did it. We made the film kind of come full circle. We explained the ending of the first one. We had fun with the audience in the second one by kind of poking a little bit of fun back at them for the stuff that they said to us, and that was it. And then the messages for a part 3 were just like unbelievable. We were just, I couldn't do anything. I could not go on a podcast. I couldn't talk about another movie I was trying to do without somebody asking, well, when's Tahoe Joe 3 coming? And it's like all anybody wanted to talk about. And almost to the point where I was like, you're not going to get it just because you guys won't stop bugging me about it. And so we got together and we were like, look, if we're going to do a third one, like we have to figure out how we're going to do this. And it has to be like the right story. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. So we didn't say anything publicly that we were going to make a third movie for a while because we just didn't want to put anything out into the universe and then it not happen. And we didn't have any clue how we would do it if we were going to do it, other than the best advice I could have ever got, which was from Rob Livings. He did the Conjuring tapes and the Christmas tapes. Rob, he lives just maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours from me, and I got to work with him a little bit on Christmas tapes. And Rob had said, look, he's like, if you're going to do a third movie, he said, you have to go completely bonkers with it, because that's what the third movies always do. The rules are thrown out. You have to maybe have a tone shift. He's like, don't worry about trying to make the most epic finale ever. He said, why don't you try to make the most fun entry ever? Let it be your Dream Warriors of the Freddy Krueger franchise, where it goes totally crazy. And Mike and I were like, you're totally right. If we're gonna do the third part of a low budget Bigfoot found footage series, like we're not gonna try and take it down the road of maybe like the Blackwell Ghost, where the guy's very serious and he's got this really kind of dark story going on and it's very, very much very serious. We wanted to go B movie territory. Let's make it fun, wild, ridiculous ride. So we basically said we're going to be taking a lot of heat probably for this from some. We'll have other people that like it. But we're like, Tahoe Joe 3 is going to have to be the funniest installment. It has to have the most Bigfoot stuff. And it has to be wildly different than the other two. So that's why we decided to go the urban Sasquatch route for a lot of it. And then we just didn't hold back with the humor. We were like, we have fun making these movies. Let's just let it shine through. And so we did. And I know a lot of people are going to be turned off by that, especially when you watch the first movie to where it ends up. But for us, it was it was just a personal film. It felt like the only way we could really end it was to have that much fun with it, because we knew we would never make it if we couldn't.
Yeah. Well, maybe this dovetails into what you already said, but maybe there's something else. But one of the ways I like to end every conversation when I talk to a filmmaker, I like to ask, is there either a lesson that you had learned from a previous film that was really helpful coming into making Tahoe Joe, or was there a lesson that you learned in the making of the Tahoe Joe films that was really valuable to you for whatever you're going to create moving forward past those?
Yeah, it would be both. I was given some advice before when I was working on my very first found footage movie from Dutch, Horror in the High Desert Dutch. Thankfully, fellow Nevada boys stick together, and he was just already kind of blowing up, but he still just took the time to like be there for me. And it was so amazing to have this guy who was like hitting it big, still having conversations with me on the phone about what I was trying to do, and it was amazing. But Dutch had told me, and I don't know if somebody else had given him this advice or if this was just his, but he said make what you know you have. And it was so groundbreaking, because if I knew I had a garage with a red truck, I could write that into my script or my story. But if I wrote that I needed a blue Ferrari, where am I going to get that? And so I took that through all of these movies, and it was like, what do I have at my disposal? Well, I have the woods, I have mountaintops, we have this or that. And it was kind of how I've done all my movies now, is like, I'll have a really good idea or a central theme. And then I start thinking, well, what do I have around me that I know I have access to, that I can formulate a scene around? And it just helps. It takes the burden off, because now I don't have to go build a set. I don't have to go rent this area to do it. I have it here already. That part is done. Now I just focus on the story or the acting side of it, or how I'm going to shoot in that spot. And so that's what I tell filmmakers all the time is, if you have a particular cool thing, you've got a property with a barn on it, then do something cool in that barn. Don't have a school bus crash into it if you can't actually pull that off, and don't make that be your entire driving point for the movie, to where it won't work if you can't do it. But, if instead you need somebody to have a fist fight in the back of a pickup truck that drives through that barn, and you can do that, then write that by all means, and I think that's what's helped me through so much of this is I will have an idea and I'm going to go make this movie. And then I think knock out everything you can do that won't cost you a dime because you already have these things or you already have access to this or that, and then worry about what you can afford from there. And I think that helps kind of allow you to do some better budget analysis, really.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic piece of advice. I had a similar piece of advice that I sort of gave myself from studying up for years when I made Ask, which was reverse engineer. Figure out what you've got, and then figure out how to build something around what you've got, as opposed to going the
Yes,
other way around.
yes.
And yeah, it was hugely successful for me. Obviously, it's been hugely successful for you for all three of the films that you worked on. So thank you for your time. You've been really kind with it. I appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we're going to have you back to talk about the a handful of other movies that you've had in this arena. But I wanted to just focus on Tahoe Joe because I think he deserved his own focus today. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you talking to us.